This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. Uh, I've been following the climate change now for 8 years, and I can say that I've never seen anything like this. There's been an acceleration like nothing I've ever seen before. Temperature records are falling everywhere. There are crop failures around the world that are underreported. Ice is melting practically as we watch in the Arctic, and now, as we know, in Antarctica as well. Although, according to the media, scientists profess to be baffled, even though I've been reading for years how warmer waters are eroding the ice from below, and it looks as though we may have reached some form of tipping point. So if government agencies and the media scribes are anything like in New Zealand, then we're not getting anything remotely approaching the truth. I'm still waiting in vain for New Zealand's BBC, Radio New Zealand, to even report the news about the melting of the Antarctic ice since 2014. So the whole of the international media, including some of the print media in New Zealand, have been publishing this, but I've been looking for this in vain. In this country, the equivalent of NOAA, that's NIWA, it seems to me, massages the temperature statistics to make it look as though things are not that serious. Science is propaganda. That's not what I'm hearing by anecdote. And myself, I bow to localism in one respect, in that I record the temperatures where I live, just out of the capital, Wellington, every day. We're at the bottom of the South Island, and we get cold fronts coming through, like we've got one right at the moment. But I'm still waiting for temperatures that are below normal or below average. Our magnolia tree, along with other plants in our garden, think that it's spring at the beginning of July. So we should be in the depths of winter right now. July has always been our coldest month. And I've been measuring this. We've just had 3 nights in a row where temperatures in the middle of the night were 16 to 17 degrees Celsius. Not quite sure what that is in Fahrenheit. I think that's the high 60s, which rivaled the daytime temperatures. So if that isn't weather or climate weirding, I don't know what is. But of course, this is not being reported. We just get the statistics, which give a kind of a very nice impression. And of course, next year will be different, except it never has been. So this is my own personal report. Now listen to the headlines from just the last few days. Climate chaos and extreme weather update, 4th of July 2009. So these are the headlines from this morning. Magnitude 6.4 quake hits Southern California on Independence Day. It was downgraded to a 6.4 from 6.6, and it hit the city of Ridgecrest near Los Angeles. And then just a few hours earlier, there was a 6.4 magnitude quake. A 6.5 magnitude earthquake hit the northwest of Canada's Vancouver Island. And I gather that there have been well over 100 aftershocks from the California earthquake. And then meanwhile, in the same region, a giant heat dome over Alaska is set to threaten all-time temperature records. it's expected to produce temperatures near and above the highest values ever recorded for multiple days, particularly in the southern parts of Alaska. It's the latest in a slew of record-shattering heat events in Alaska. Anchorage is predicted to test or best its highest temperature ever recorded of 85 degrees, set in 1969 on 5 straight days between July the 4th and 8th. It could even flirt with 90 degrees. These are headlines from the last few days. I don't have a date stamp on them. Meanwhile, in Japan, this is current. Flooding and landslide warnings in Japan force more than 1 million people to evacuate. Over 1.24 million residents of the southwestern Japanese island of Kyushu received an emergency evacuation order on Wednesday due to the threat of landslides and floods caused by heavy rains, according to Kyodo News. And then this has been the headlines this week. Scientists baffled as Antarctic ice hits record low, wiping out 3 decades of gains. And they profess to be baffled by this, even though I've known for almost as long as I've been following this that the Antarctic ice is being melted from below, from warm water below the ice. And now this is interesting. It talks partially about India, but also globally. Satellite data shows shrinking reservoirs that may spark major water crisis globally. It's not just Chennai, India's 5th largest city, that is facing acute water crisis. Analysis of satellite data showing shrinking reservoirs may spark major water crisis globally. Chennai received a rude shock recently when monsoons got delayed this year, completely drying up 4 major reservoirs supplying drinking water to the city. However, Chennai is far from being the only city in the world to face this kind of acute water crisis. Going by a satellite-based study from the World Resources Institute, neither is it the only city in India. In fact, as per the WRI report, which came out in April 2018, a major part of central India is staring at a crisis, with Sardar Sarovar Dam and Indira Sagar Dam, which hold water for millions, is shrinking. And this is the map for baseline water stress, and as you can see, it's extremely high for India, here for Pakistan, and of course parts of China. And meanwhile, this made the New Zealand media, which rather surprised me. Chennai runs out of water. 9 million people pray for rain in the Indian city. And I think this might be a reprint from the BBC. I'm not sure. It looks like a good article. Anyway, I'm putting the links for all of this. It's all contained in my article on my blog, which I'll put down below. And CNN is asking, are parts of India becoming too hot for humans? Intense heat waves have killed more than 100 people in India this summer and are predicted to worsen in coming years, creating a possible humanitarian crisis as large parts of the country potentially become too hot to be inhabitable. But as usual, it's happening quicker than previously anticipated, or whatever the phrase is. Heat waves in India usually take place between March and July and abate once the monsoon rains arrive, but in recent years these hot spells have become more intense, more frequent and longer. India is among the countries expected to be the worst affected by the impacts of the climate crisis, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And then in New Zealand, which always underreports what's happening, almost record warm temperatures in South Island for July. Well, sitting here, not on the South Island, but at the bottom of the North Island, I can tell you that there's never, ever experienced anything like this. It doesn't matter what the record temperatures are, it's how they compare with the average temperatures. And then again, writing this all down, almost record warm temperatures in South. Oh, sorry, no, that was. But first half of the year, the fifth warmest on record, according to NIWA. And of course, it said during summer, heat wave conditions scorched our seas for the second consecutive year, while several areas of the country suffered ongoing drought conditions, including Nelson, Tasman, where prolonged wildfires occurred and a state of emergency was declared, says NIWA meteorologist Ben Knoll. Of course, it was all local. It's just local conditions, temporary conditions that are creating this every year. It's nothing to do with global warming. And then meanwhile, Australia posts its hottest January to June for days. As Big Dry rolls on, Australia's hottest start to any year extended to a 6th month for daytime temperatures, even as day conditions moderated in June, while rainfall continued to be very much below average for last parts of the country. Average maximum temperatures for the first half of 2019 were 1.78 degrees above the 1961 to 90 baseline used by the Bureau of Meteorology. That pipped the previous record set in 2005 in data that goes back more than a century. Well, at least the Australians are not trying to underplay this like the New Zealanders, who I believe are probably massaging the statistics to produce a completely false impression. And then in China, it's been a brutal heat wave, strikes China, Guangdong and Hebei provinces. Sprinkler trucks have sprayed water to help reduce the scorching temperatures in Handan City. And in the Philippines, depleted reservoir leaves Manila dry. And then there's this. June 2019 was the hottest ever recorded on Earth, according to the European Satellite Agency. And Alaska, which we've already seen, is having a devastating heat wave. It's fueling dangerous smoke and it's melting the glaciers. That's from Reuters. So record warmth and near record warmth in most of the state has created flammable conditions from the Canadian border in the east to the Bering Sea coast in the west. And of course, as we know, the ice in the Bering Strait has completely gone, and it's also going above Alaska in the Beaufort as well. Unprecedented Arctic megafires are releasing a huge amount of CO2. And a multi-year drought has caused massive forest die-off in Sierra Nevada. The most severe drought event in hundreds of years caused catastrophic die-off in the Sierra Nevadas mature trees in 2015, 2016. And of course, there are many, many factors involved in this. There's the preponderance of ozone pollution, and of course there's the whole kind of geoengineering thing Uh, but neither of those are really primary in my mind. This is climate change. So parts of the Sierra Nevada reached a tipping point in 2015 where annual precipitation plus stored subsurface water were not enough to meet the water demand of the forest. And that's right. It doesn't, and that's what I've been observing in my own country. It doesn't really matter. We might have periods of rain and everything, but the subsurface water is just not enough. And then in Sri Lanka, 90% of Sri Lanka's live coral reefs are dead. Sri Lanka's state-owned Marine Environment Protection Authority on Wednesday warned that the country had only 10% of live coral reefs in its oceans, as 90% had died due to pollution, illegal fishing methods, and excessive climate change. Somehow that's made its way sort of down from what I was telling him before. And then there's this. German bug watchers sound alarm over massive extinction of insects. And we're noticing that in this country as well. And we're also noticing just a fall off in the number of birds in our own garden, even though we do what we can to provide the best conditions. And then back to the United States, thousands of whales are dying. Scientists have run out of public beaches for the carcasses to rot. So many grey whales are dying off the US West Coast that scientists and volunteers dealing with the putrid carcasses have an urgent request for coastal residents. Lend us your private beaches so that these ocean giants can rot in. And this is from phys.org. Scientists sound alarm after 6 rare whale deaths in a month. A half-dozen North Atlantic right whales have died in the past month, leading scientists, government officials, and conservationists to call for a swift response to protect the endangered species. So all 6 dead whales have been found in the Gulf of St. Lawrence off Canada, and at least 3 appeared to have died after they were hit by ships. So the deaths have led scientists to sound the alarm about a potentially catastrophic loss to the population. And then, meanwhile, crossing the globe, Lithuania declares an emergency as drought hits farmers. Lithuania declared an emergency as a severe drought hit the Baltic EU state, threatening to slash this year's harvest by up to a half. More rain aims at Japan after a one-day rain. Totals exceeding 16 inches trigger deadly mudslides and flooding. And then in India, which is also has its drought and its water, there are other parts that have water where they don't want it. Mumbai rains 550 millimetres in 48 hours was too much to handle, says BMC. That's the Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation. And as Commissioner Praveen Pardeshi claimed, Mumbai has already witnessed a total of 80% rain in the last 4 days, which is the usual rainfall for the entire month of June. And of course, that's probably pretty high anyway. And then prolonged drought affecting farmers, producers. This is Jamaica. Jamaica did not experience the normal May rains this year and is currently going through a period of drought which is affecting everybody, especially those who farm or sell in markets. for a living. So I hope you're getting a picture in your mind of all the areas where there's where there's problems with crops, whether it's through excessive rain or excessive heat. Lithuania, oh yes, so that's got a little bit mixed up. And this is sort of more political news, but it points to the way of the future. China now owns 10 times the amount of Australian land it did a year ago. So the amount of Australian farmland owned by Chinese interests has surged tenfold in the past year, climbing to above 14 million hectares, or 2.5% of all agricultural land. The findings from the Australian Tax Office's Agricultural Land Register, released this week, shows that the UK and China are the largest owners of foreign held land in Australia, owning 27% and 25% respectively. Well, I would say that probably shows that the Chinese are really aiming to feed themselves, and they're in excess of 1 billion people. And this from Hal Turner. The specifics may not be accurate, but he's pointing in the right direction. Food shortages begin in the USA. On June 24th, this website advised readers national emergency as US farm crops fail, food shortages by late July, food riots thereafter. Turns out the food shortages have already begun. You better take heed and stock up now or go hungry. So, and he has this picture from a walnut. So again, China now owns 10 times the amount of Australian land that it did a year ago. Somehow we've managed to. And we go to this. This hasn't really got into the news a lot. Siberia hit by worst flooding in a century. Remember how we had terrible fires just a week ago, and who knows, they're probably ongoing. 14 people killed, 13 remain missing in Russia. So as of July the 2nd, 14 people have been killed and 13 remain missing since the heavy rains began last week. Floods affected 33,000 people in 83 villages. 40 villages are still underwater. Emergency Service said 1,200 people are in need of medical aid and 190 have been admitted to hospitals. And there's a video to go with this, which you can play for yourself. Now, this is from Michael Schneider. I'm quite impressed by what he's been coming out with. He puts it down to a solar minimum, but he is reporting on this, whereas others aren't. So isn't it strange that the climate change deniers are reporting on this, whereas the liberal media by and large are not? So this is the map that he produces. That shows the areas where there are crop failures. So on that note, I'll finish. I'll just leave that for a few seconds just so that you can let that sink in.